Without further ado, our keynote and closing speaker for our wonderful work together is AfterStacey Walker. He is a county supervisor in Lynn County. And I heard about him, I just want to tell you, I was really inspired by listening to him talk at a church in Cedar Rapids about a recent coming together of different communities to respond to police violence. And there was a young African American who had been shot in Cedar Rapids. And the people who came together were amazing. And then Mr. Walker stood up and talked about the way his family has been engaged civically, you know, and this is, so it's intergenerational work for his family. And the way he's just picked up that piece with his awareness and his conscientious look over the community to say, what can I do? How can I engage? And he took those steps to be civically engaged. And it's similar to what we're doing today. We're asking what we can do. And so I wanted him to come and speak from his passion and his knowledge and his public service to us today. Stacey Walker.
Would it be all right if I move this to here, space?
Wherever you like.
Great. Well, thank you, Amita, for organizing and hosting. Is it the Benevolent Community Initiative? Thank you for helping make this possible. I have a makeshift podium here. I've got a few notes because I want to make sure I don't forget anything when I speak to you. So my name is Stacey Walker. Forgive me, Ryan, I know you've kind of heard the beginning of my talk here recently. But I was born here in Iowa. I was born in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And I was born to a single mother who was not college educated, but by most accounts that I've heard, she's a pretty sharp woman with a big heart, and did the best she could to provide a good life for me and my sister. When I was 4 years old, my mother took a trip to Buffalo, New York to care for a sick friend. And while she was there, she was murdered. And the case was never solved. I grew up without a father figure, so my sister and I went to live with our grandmother, Shirley Martin, who was also a single mother. She had raised 7 kids on her own. She was a child of the South. She was born in rural Alabama, Opelika, towards the end of World War II. And I went to live with her when I was 4, so she was essentially my mother and my father, and the person who I remember the most having the greatest impact on my life. She would often tell us stories about her area that she grew up in. She'd say there was an area where the Indians lived, as she called it, and where the black folks lived and where the white folks lived. And all of us, I'm sure, know a bit about American history. It wasn't a great time to be an African American growing up in the Deep South then. So there were 2 or maybe 3 even big waves of migration of black Americans from the American South to the northern cities. So eventually my grandmother found her way to Chicago, where she raised most of her kids. And even growing up in Chicago in the 60s and 70s was no easy street for black Americans. And she followed her sister to Iowa. Her sister and her sister's boyfriend were one of the first African American students to be admitted into Upper Iowa University. And they've got stories about their time there. I think that was in the 70s in Upper Iowa. And eventually they found their way to Cedar Rapids. And in 1988, that's when I was born. And I was born in this long tradition of survivors, of people who had seen some of the worst in America and had figured out a way to cope, figured out a way to survive, and to train up their young ones to make it in this world. Not only to make it, but to make a difference. And as Michelle Obama said, if you can be one of the few that can make it through this, you then have an obligation to reach back and help somebody else out. And that was, that ethic was big in my family. Anita kind of hit on it. And so I found myself in the center of social justice movements my entire life. And I found myself volunteering for folks I believed in by the time I got to college. I was educated here at the University of Iowa. And in 2008, I think that would have been my sophomore year, or junior year. And I got to volunteer for a person I believed in, who went on to become President of the United States. And 4 years later, I got a chance to work on his re-election campaign back here in Iowa. And a lot of the things President Obama believed in were things I believed in. And what I found to be really special about that whole time that we are so forlorn for and missing right now was that, I heard somebody say it in the circle today, was that there was a vision for what America could be. And for a time it felt like we were traveling down that path of the ideal and of progress. And I think now it's more important that we try to reimagine what it is we can be and encourage folks not to give up on our pursuit of that ideal. So, it's a little bit about myself and how I got to be here. What is our call and what is our challenge? What is our challenge today? And I think we all know we are living in a time where we have many challenges. So I'll name a few. Healthcare. I've said this before, Ryan has heard me say this. It's not a radical idea to expect that in the wealthiest country in the history of the earth, our residents can expect access to quality, affordable health care. And that we have all of this wealth, a seemingly infinite amount of wealth. It should be a right, not a privilege. Also on the topic of health care, it should not be a radical idea to expect that women should have dominion over their own lives. I believe that health care should be the province of any legislature. So we know that. We know there are a lot of things happening right now with health care that could be better. Immigration. We are a country of immigrants. Anita quoted Barack Obama and even used the cadence of Barack Obama when she said, "We all come from somewhere." Is that good? Our treatment of those coming to our country seeking shelter and safety is abhorrent, quite honestly. And notice, this is only about people with black and brown skin, or about people who pray to a different God that a lot of Americans pray to. And that to me, and I'll be plain spoken about this, means that these current policies of the Trump administration are racist, period. When we resort to separating children from their parents and locking these children in cages, we are well on our way of losing our humanity. And I think we ought to reconcile with that before it's too late. Other issues we have to think about are issues of physical safety, gun violence, human trafficking, and police brutality. I have said this before, Black Lives Matter is not a radical idea. It is not anti-white. It is not anti-law enforcement. But it is pro-humanity. It is saying that right now, in the here and now, we've got a group of people who are being persecuted. This is state-sponsored terrorism and aren't finding justice. And it's up to each and every one of us to stand in the void, to be the ally, to say we will not accept this. Because I am hard-pressed to believe that if we had an epidemic of white Americans or wealthy Americans being shot and killed by police officers, I think the collective response from the majority would be a little different. Crippling poverty. It's another issue we need to think about. Nelson Mandela, as we celebrate his 100th birthday recently, most famously said, and it has been re-articulated by other personalities throughout the modern era, that poverty is no accident. The perpetuation of poverty is no accident. And because it is man-made, and because poverty oftentimes is maintained by institutions, that means we can change it. Or at the very least, we can interrupt the cycles of poverty. And that is something I hope we will think about. I could go on and on about our justice system, and how certain demographics are unfairly punished by our justice system. And if you are a wealthy individual, oftentimes you don't see the inside of the prison cell, no matter what crime it is you commit. We've got to think about these issues. There is, in this country, a reemergence of a hostile white nationalism. Some people call it fascism. But when you have instances, I'm not going to elaborate. I think you understand the reemergence of a hostile white nationalism that we need to reconcile. There is a rise of illiteracy and the resistance of facts and expertise. There is a rise against anti-academia. We've got an entire political party that doesn't understand the value and benefits of funding higher education. And that ought to worry us. Our education system as a whole seems to be on the brink right now. There is a concern about a school-to-prison pipeline. There should be a concern about outcomes-based privilege. There should be a concern about the fact that we don't value our teachers and we don't value our schools. And if we did, I think our values would be reflected in our budgets. And there is a big question about college affordability. I saw somewhere recently on Facebook, there is now a game show in America where you compete. I think it's a trivia game show where people can go on and compete. And if you are successful and you win the show, that show will pay off your student loans. And that's where we've gotten to in this country. So I've listed out just a few things that I think we ought to be concerned about. And we all know this list is not exhaustive. We could go on and on and on. But what I want to do now is talk a little bit about my approach. Certainly it can be workshop, but I just want to share it with you. My approach to how we might address such perplexing issues, complicated issues. Here's what I think. I think we need to be weary. We need to be mindful of, that's a better term, of outrage fatigue. It is true that we live in perilous times and we must take self-care seriously. We cannot let our blood pressure rise at every instance, every time we turn on the news. We've got to be mindful about meditation and find our peace and take care of ourselves if we are to have the strength to fight on any one of these fronts. We've got to train our focus. It's okay, be okay with focusing on one or two or three issues at a time. And understand that you don't have to be the great savior. Find out what it is you can do and do it well. Be relentless, be honest, be open, be willing to change course if you need to. And do all things with love in your heart. Because as soon as we give in to hatred, as soon as we let those negative feelings that we all feel when we turn on the news and we see something ridiculous, as soon as we give in to that, then we've lost. The other side is our reward. So I implore you to do this work with love in your heart. Remember your why. And I think one of the things that keeps me going is trying to understand my role in the larger scheme of history. There is a bigger picture. We've heard it said before that we are much bigger than ourselves. And we can trace our genealogical roots to the great social movements of the past. I'll give you a few examples. Rosa Parks, she knew that her actions on the bus were about more than just the right for Black Americans to sit wherever they wanted to sit on a bus. She knew that. She knew there was a larger idea in front of her. This was about human dignity. This was about equality under the law. The singular decision that was made to have an open casket for Emmett Till was not just about demonstrating the horrors that had been done to this sweet little boy, but rather it represented the collective atrocities being perpetrated against Black Americans across the country. And when Brother King said to us that he had been to the mountaintop, that he may not get there with us, he was giving us all a prophecy of the promised land, of a better America, a prophecy of the future that we could bring into existence if we remain steadfast and if we walk by faith. Now, these are all of the things and more I'm sure you've talked about or thought about, particularly in these last few days. But it all goes to show that what we're working toward is something bigger. There was a speech given, one of my favorite speeches ever. Robert Kennedy gave a speech in South Africa, largely to a group of college-aged students in the 60s. And it was a brave speech because there he sat in the middle of a country torn apart by apartheid, in a country that did not value the rights of some. And he talked about liberalism, a political philosophy, an ideal where all women and men are created equal. And in this speech, and I will do my best to paraphrase, but it was that speech where he talked about the ripples, the ripple effects. And I think he said something like, many men may not have the strength to impact history in the way of the greats that we'll always think of. But he talked about these tiny little acts. And he said something like, in the total of all of these acts, that will write the next chapter in our generation of history, right? Kind of hits on all of these things. Figure out what it is we really care about. Understand that we can do the little things, and we can do the little things well. And collectively, it's going to move the needle. I've said this before. We've all heard that quote, that the moral arc of the history is long, but it bends towards justice, right? We've all heard that. But here's where I wish the author of that quote would elaborate a little more. In order to bend that moral arc, it's going to take folks like you hanging on it. We want to bend it. We've got to decide that is what we want to do. And we've got to see the larger picture. We've got to understand that your being here today is another step toward bending that arc. In the last circle, everyone talked about what they're going to do next. And it can seem daunting. Being courageous in the lion's den can seem daunting. Practicing Buddhism can seem insignificant if it is the case that you believe that that's just one act that you're doing. All of these things that I heard, piecing together a platform that is inclusive, that is created by the people. It can seem like it's just one thing, but in the final analysis, those are the things that are going to bend that moral arc. And if you see that, you can paint that picture for yourself. That's what keeps you going. When it gets hard, and you're getting all those notifications, I should try to turn my watch off, but I get CNN notifications from Washington Post. And every time I look down, I'm like, Jimmy, what's next? Anytime the news is on, gosh, what's next? That's that outrage fatigue creeping up. Johnson County? Did somebody travel here from Madison? And Lynn County, not too far away from their neighbor. If we can understand ourselves in the larger context of history, that is the motivation to keep going. I often tell folks, they ask me, why do you do what you do? Why do you take so much time to go out and talk to different groups and talk to young folks? And I've got a selfish motivation. And I do want to live in a better place, a better community. But I think if I'm lucky enough to have kids one day, I know I'm going to have to explain it. They're going to ask the question, what was it like when you were living in that time? I'm going to have to explain it to them. But I also know, I just know this. I know they're going to ask me, what did you do? What is it that you did to make things better, to right the wrong, to help course correct? And I want to have a good answer for my offspring, a good answer for their friends. Because half the time I feel like that. I feel like when you reflect on history and you meet someone who have lived through our turbulent times, you kind of want to know, what was life like for you? Surely you remember this. When folks were protesting, when folks were marching, when they were staging sit-ins, and the Freedom Riders got on the buses. What were you doing? And I think, and I know, we all in this room will have an answer. I will, I know I've already exhausted my time, so I'll close with this. And maybe stick around for questions, however long you intend to go after this. I'll close with this. Henry James was an author in the late 1800s, early 1900s. He might have died in the 1800s. I don't know. I'll fact check it. But in the middle years, this is what he said. We work in the dark. We do what we can. We give what we have. Our passion is our task. Our work is our passion. Our passion is our task. The rest is the beautiful chaos of life. We got to work in the dark. Not all of us are going to get the credit. It's okay. We got to give what we have to give to these causes that you care about. We do what we can. And the final analysis will be all right. I promise you. Thank you for everything.
Small details, and I'll invite our coordinator if she has anything to add, but be thinking that you're on next, or you can offer a gentleman from here. Okay. She's good. She's always good. So one of the things I want to remind you about is next week we're going to the Meskwaki Nation, and we're going to sit down with some of their elders. They're going to give us a tour of their museum. Show us their economic development stuff. You know, they're doing good stuff. And, you know, I know members of that community who are very interested in solidarity and building conversations with people from different communities. And so we're going to learn something about living in alignment with values of the land we're living on. And this is, you know, land that was taken through colonization. So we all want to walk right on this land, and this is a wonderful opportunity to explore what that looks like. It'll be from 10 to 4, and in your thank you letter from Freedom School 360, we'll give details and talk about carpooling. But it's the 25th, and so that's next week, and so think about joining us and, you know, even inviting friends. So the other thing is there will be a short reception at Fox Head or Tail, one of those things. It's a Fox Anatomy Park. It's a cat, it's a fox, it's a mountain lion. as if you can tonight, and that's 2 blocks that way on Market, whichever way Market is, at 6. And the last detail is the cleanup. So, do you want to?
If I could just have
3.
We'll start our morning together with meditation. Making the adjustments with our body to find a comfortable but upright posture. As Demita instructed us on the first day, and Duet and I have both been reminding us to ground down, to feel our connection to the earth. And letting your mind anchor itself in your breath. Anchoring your experience in your body so that when your thoughts and emotions pull you away, once you become aware that they have, you can come back. You have a place to come back to. You have a home in your own body. diaspora map from the last few days. Thank you, Meg. We thought it would be a really nice thing to do, if you're willing, for each person to stand and say where you are on that map. Just to have a verbal, embodied experience of that to match with the map. You don't have to. If you don't want to, you've already put something on. If you haven't, we still have Sharpies and markers that you can before you leave. It'd be great to say your name, and then to say what you marked. And if you haven't marked it yet, yeah, excellent, go for it. If you haven't marked it yet, you can say it and then mark it later or mark it now. A sense to get our diaspora map in order before we talk about basic goodness again. So maybe we could start at the front and work our way back. That works? Thank you.
Holly, did you say anything?
Duet, would you start?
Yes. I have Duet Cullen, and I have a flag on Vietnam, and I have a flag on Scotland.
Holly?
Well, I feel like my diaspora is where we are scattering. And I have a daughter and 4 grandchildren and 10 great-grandchildren. And they are all in Alaska. And I just feel like our family, my sisters are in California. The great part of my progeny are in Alaska, and happy to be there and miserably homesick when they're here without mountains. And I just feel like we are really scattering, and that's, my mother wanted terribly to trace her genealogy to important persons in the past and wasn't very successful, and I just feel like that isn't very meaningful to me, and that we're just now scattering everywhere.
Great. So looking at right now how your diaspora is moving forward, actually.
And of my grandchildren, most of them are mixed race. They're from the Pacific Rim. They are Native Alaskan American. They are Filipino American. They're Laotian American. So they're African American, and that seems to me the real diaspora that our family is.
Thank you for sharing that. That's something that doesn't show up on the map, right? Even when you just put a tab down.
No, I
Yeah.
have to have
Right.
them all over the place.
Thank you. Is that?
Well, I'm Russian, Irish, and Italian.
So I planted a couple. My dad's lineage, my grandfather's family traced back to Germany, and my grandmother on his side from Italy. And on my mother's side, my grandmother is English and traced back to Massachusetts in early colonial times. And my grandfather, his family fled Hungary.
I'm Beth, and I planted 3 tabs. 2 for my father's family, which is Scotland and England, and 1 for my mother's family, which is Bavaria in Germany.
I'm Heidi Sinderman. I haven't planted any flags, I missed that. I feel kind of confused where my flags go, because I'm from Michigan, that's where I was born, still have people there, but I'm adopted, and my birth mom is in Colorado, and I don't actually know where we came from, so to speak, what our nationality is. But then I also identify with my mom that I grew up with, her grandparents, and, her parents, my grandparents, who immigrated from Poland, and who I was able to go to one of their hometowns in Poland. And then I kind of feel like I'm kind of floating in the water, like I'm here and there, I'm not sure, so I'm a little bit of a few places.
Thank you for sharing that. You can always say pass if you want to pass.
My name's Lori Odd. My father's family both left Germany and became Danish. A couple generations later came to this country. My mother's family is from the British Isles, but they talk mostly about Scotland. So, put 2 flags.
I'm Kate, and I did 2 flags also. My father was from Canada and then kind of Western Europe. I sort of get hung up with the boundaries changing every time there's a war, so I think it's just kind of there.
And I'm Lori, and I put a flag just over Europe. My father's from Germany, and my mother's side is Swedish and Norwegian.
Temple. My father's side is from Ireland, and my mother's side is from Switzerland.
Danita, we believe our family came from Ghana. We don't have a lot of details, and we have we're just kind of guessing something from the United Kingdom because of our last name, but we don't know. So there's a lot of ambiguity and grief.
I'm Judy, and I put my flag on Great Britain because I think some of my ancestors were from there, but I'm really not entirely clear. I know there's some from Germany. But I kind of relate to Holly's thing. My daughter is back in Wales. She lives in Wales now with her Iranian husband. And so my sense is more of the future in that, melding of different cultures and, in the diaspora to come.
I'm Paul. I put a flag on Ireland.
I'm Marge. I put my flag on Scotland. My mother's side is all Scottish. My father's side, the entire time I was growing up, told me that he was English-Dutch. But when my brother has done extensive DNA testing and studying genealogy, my father's family was almost entirely Scottish, just a pinch of English-Dutch. He went to his death not knowing that he was also Scottish.
My name is Meg. My primary roots are Irish, Scottish, and Norwegian. I put the flag on Ireland though, because that's the line that I most identify with, because it's the stories that have been passed down. That we came to America during the Irish potato famine, brother and sister, and so we had letters going back and forth about conditions in Ireland and settling in America, and even have the deed for the first property that they bought, which looks like it was in Iowa along the Mississippi River. So that's the strand that I feel most connected to.
Our flags are on England and Germany. Don't know a lot about it, except that's what I was told. I think the Germany piece was from the Hessian soldiers that the British hired to fight the Americans.
My last name now is Borger Gurman, because my wife and I combined our names. So my former last name is Gurman, which looks exactly like the word German, except they added an N and made the G hard. I have no idea why. So it's Germany is where.
I'm John Grieve. One of my flags is on United Kingdom. That's my mother's side. They were also in Massachusetts very early on. And then my father's side is from Germany. His dad was from kind of northern Germany, and his mother's family was kind of middle Germany. And over to, in the 1870s, I think, to avoid series of wars.
I'm Rachel. I do not put any flags, for whatever reason. But if I had, I think I would have just put it on Iowa. I don't really know much about my family's heritage besides that we changed our last name at some point from ASSING to ESSING. I remember that my dad had mentioned Germany. My mom's biological father, she doesn't know, so there's that entire story missing. Interesting. I think that similar to Holly and to Judy, I'm more interested in where we're going, as well as where we're coming from. I think that there's this connection, and it's really interesting being that person who's seeing kind of a little both and.
I'm Annie, and I put a flag on the British Isles for English and Scotch-Irish, and I put one on the Netherlands for Dutch. And I just want to say, you know, in a different conversation, not when we're talking about family genealogy, but when we're talking about like the history of mankind, we talk about the first humans coming from Africa. But when you get your genealogy done, it doesn't mention that. Like that isn't like a baseline that then there are subsequent things. So I just wanted to hold up that idea that there's that too for all of us.
I'm Suzanne, and I know there's a strong German heritage. It was interesting when we talked in our dyads the other day because someone else pointed toward how their name was changed to be something else, and like I didn't know for a long time that there was British lineage, because when that part of the family moved to Iowa, they changed from Smith to Schmidt so they would fit in, so it took a while to track that. But I do have my great-grandfather's little wooden chest that he made before he left Germany to bring all his things in, so I know that that's where he came from. But I didn't put a flag because I'm missing something, and that's the indigenous part of my history here, because it was hidden in the family, and I'm still trying to track it through my grandmother and grandfather.
I'm Laura, and I put 2 flags now. I put one in Central Africa because we suspect that our family was mostly from the South Africa area, which all South Africans came from Central Africa. So I put one there, but then I also put one in the United States where my people came from, Greensboro, Alabama, Tuscaloosa, Selma, Alabama, and then migrated to Chicago. This whole, like the whole thing is really tripped out for me because since like I was a teenager and having friends who could connect cultural garb and food to where their great-great-grandparents were from, that piece was missing because the things that we had to hold on to were things that were created from slavery. So there's always that piece that hurt behind it when you have to go back and think about it, like there's something missing. I have to get back to find out where my people are from and you know how that shapes who I am today. Like that piece is just like so deeply like missing in my life. Just want to share that.
Yeah, I did in England and Germany, and my father was adopted, so there are a lot of big question marks, never knowing. And I was the person who said, it was Suzanne who said the name was, my grandfather told us we were Irish when we grew up on my mom's side, and then we found out it's actually German. but he changed the spelling so it looked more Irish. It's just interesting, that bait and switch that happens somehow around identity and shame, and I so appreciate, the quality of like what's missing that Laura just spoke to and other people spoke to and Suzanne spoke to, a few other people spoke to, like these missing qualities, how you spoke to it, like not knowing. And then the quality of what I think of as like genealogical bait and switch, when people like change names, or of course it can be oppression bait and switch, right? Like, we're gonna give you this name, we're gonna take away all of your everything else, give you this culture. So I just really feel like it's huge human tenderness right now. So grateful to Tamita and Rachel for setting this up, and also to all of us for like holding this together. I wanted to read you just a tiny thing from a book and then say a few things. This is a great book that DeWitt introduced us to. Tamita came up to Madison to run a program with DeWitt and myself, and DeWitt had just seen this author speak and bought copies for like all of her favorite peeps. And said, you all need this immediately. So it's called The Body is Not an Apology, The Power of Radical Self-Love. And it's by Sonia Renee Taylor. It has a totally beautiful picture of her naked, covered in like flower petals, barely covered in flower petals in the front. So awesome. I think about this, I'm going to read this passage, understanding both that we're talking about external difference and also internal difference. So the Karuna training practice that I've given to you that we'll work with again in a moment, that we sometimes want to disidentify with parts of ourselves that are in pain, that are struggling, that we're not confident about, that we just feel somehow we wish weren't us. We've been told that that's not a good part of ourselves. To really let ourselves accept and have kindness and recognize the power in this. So she's talking about external difference, but I think also internal difference. Rendering difference invisible. So she's saying when we try to erase difference and say that there's no difference, rendering difference invisible validates the notion that there are parts of us that should be ignored, hidden, or minimized, leaving in place the unspoken idea that difference is the problem and not our approach to dealing with difference. So there's this quality, again, both internally and externally, of trying to erase difference that can happen. And so inside of ourselves, as well as in our relationships, really respecting difference, recognizing it, honoring it, holding it, hearing all of these different stories of experience, recognizing our own diaspora from where we came and other people's diaspora, and then also as others are saying where we're going. Each of us are an individual human being, and we're also interdependent. So we've been talking about basic goodness, which really is a basic confidence in the way that DeWitt was talking about it yesterday, this quality of confidence in which we have, we're lacking in self-doubt. We're actually tapped into our own wisdom. And that's powerful. It's powerful, actually, when we're tapped into it. We all have power, and that's the source of our power. The source of our power, even if we have privileged, empowered positions, is actually not external. It's internal. That's where the real power comes from. And if we're relying on our external reflections of power, our privileged positions to give us power, we're not working with the power that actually empowers us. And if we've been oppressed and had our power taken away from us in external sources, the place that we can turn into is that basic goodness, that empowerment. It seeds it in us, and it also seeds it in all of our relationships. When we don't recognize our own power, we undermine other people. So if that empowering is so important. There's a quality of awareness, of working with being aware of ourselves and our impact that also needs to be balanced out with kindness, so that we don't become hyper self-aware to the point where we're walking on eggshells constantly. And this goes for both people who are in privileged positions and people who are not in privileged positions. That we spend a lot of time walking on eggshells around each other and ourselves, and we need to be able to relax and trust, be able to make mistakes and be okay with that. Let each other make mistakes, while at the same time really listening and receiving the feedback when we get it. If someone who has a different diaspora, a different experience, a different background says, that's not how I received that, can we have a kindness with each other to actually hear that, to be able to receive it and not take it as a sign that we're an awful person at our core, because we're not. And we still make mistakes. We're always in exchange with each other, we're always in relationship with each other, we're always bringing something to the table, and we're always receiving something. And the more open we can be to ourselves and what our experience is, the more we can feel our own discomfort, the more we can be with that long enough to let it integrate, the more we can be present for others. But it's as this woman named Lisa Renee Hall, who I follow, who's an African-American woman who works with people decolonizing their minds, she likes to say it's an outer and an inner job. So it's something that we're working on inside and outside at the same time. It's not just inner, it's not just outer. One of the best ways to do that when we're engaging with someone else and we feel threatened or shut down or freaked out, which happens doing this work, this is intense work, is to really actually tap in, what's my experience right now in my body? Can I get below the storyline of what I'm telling and actually own my physical experience and be present with someone else from that place? Does that sound legitimate? Yeah? Anybody doubting me? Because that's fair. So I really want to invite you, during the rest of today, we're going to do some closing practices together this morning that can be challenging in the best way. Like, hopefully you felt held in the last few days, and hopefully you will continue to feel held by us and also by each other. And when we're challenged in a held space, that you can really tap in, what's my experience now? What's happening in me now? Use that practice that I gave you, or another practice that you have that helps you get in touch with your body. So recognizing, again, just to review it, recognizing that you're having a physical experience, that's a big first step. Like, I'm having a physical experience right now. I feel nervous, my guts are tight, my back is rigid. Maybe you don't even know what it is emotionally, so you're just recognizing the physical experience, acknowledging that to yourself, then getting curious about it. Again, that curiosity that we keep bringing up is so key. You know, not, oh, I know what that is, that's my sciatic injury from 20 years ago. But, oh, it's okay, does it have a temperature? Right now, what's its temperature? What's the color? What's the shape? Anything that you could sense. Does it have a scent? You know, get silly with it, get curious. Like it's a new thing, because it is a new thing. It's an old thing and a new thing at the same time. So asking yourself that, trying to visualize it or feel it and see what it feels like, and then holding it, not running away, not othering, not saying this is different and I don't want it. It's different than the rest of my experience when I'm not in pain. So really being okay with that, holding it, standing near it, putting your hand on it, letting yourself connect with it. And then letting go and let it change, even if only subtly. But that deep inner work, if we can be doing that deep inner work while we're doing the outer work, it helps us build resilience and capacity. And it's essential. That's really the view of the work that we're doing, is that this is essential. We have to have resilience and capacity. We continue to increase that even as we increase what we're learning and how we're learning and the connections we're making. There's our freedom. There's part of our freedom. There's the basis of the freedom, from which comes the freedom movements that we all work in order to help liberate things on the larger scale. But without that basis, it's important work, but it doesn't have the heart in it that we need to keep going. It's actually a risk to be kind. We can take the risk to be kind with ourselves, take the risk to be kind with others, take the risk to stay open just a moment longer into the discomfort and feel. And when we have to close and it doesn't feel like being open is a possibility, to be kind with ourselves about that and recognizing that we vacillate in and out. But kindness at all costs. So I've run over for time.
Do you want 5 more minutes?
No, I think that's good. Feel the power of that kindness. Does anyone have anything you want to add or question? Yeah.
Well, it's just I'm wondering about the tension of internal and external power. Say a little more about it, because it strikes me, I really resonate with where you're inviting us to go here. But I also wonder about the limits of internal power. If it's true that internal power is maybe the real source of power, but then it could be that someone's own lack of empowerment might be their own fault then.
Certainly. So thank you for naming that. That's super crucial misunderstanding that's so easy to make.
Okay.
Like I'm a white female Buddhist teacher. Like it's really easy for folks in my position to do what we call spiritual bypassing, which is like, if you just feel your empowerment, you'll be okay. Not the message. Not the message I want to be giving. And at the same time, the core belief is that if we're looking to someone else to give us power, and we're not in touch with our own power, we're never going to get the resource that we need. So both and. That's why I'm talking about the inner work and the outer work, that we need that inner work, we need that core inside of us, or it's like core muscles, that kind of workout, in order to help support any of the other, maybe we could call it big P, like corporate power, government power, oppression power, right? Structural power, structural disempowerment, disenfranchisement, all of that. And watch as people burn themselves out. They just burn out, right? They pass out from it because we're not in touch with. And on top of that, I think, just speak from my own experience as a white woman, like when I'm looking to other people to give that to me, then I can be mean. I don't have a kindness in me because I'm not aware of the fact that I do have some power. All of us have some power. So being in touch with what we do have, recognizing our potency and our power, helps make us clearer and more effective with the powers, plural, that we're working with externally. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Lori, thank you for calling that out.
Yeah, I am so appreciating this, and hearing you speak about it, because I realize how, just sometimes speaking about just power without specificity, you know what I mean, it feels very confusing.
Yes.
But if you speak about celebration or mourning, you know what I mean, I can more generally link into that.
Sure.
So.
Power is a very loaded word that has a lot of different connotations to it. I think what we're trying to do is reclaim that. We're trying to reclaim it, but also not just as a personal thing, because it's a really dire, mistaken move on behalf of a lot of predominantly white-run spiritual organizations and belief lineages, where we actually just encourage people to sort of like manifest that, right? That kind of quality of like, and saying that you're empowered without recognizing there are a lot of different aspects of power going on at the same time.
That reminds me of the idea that, you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yeah.
But what about those who don't
That's what's
have
underneath
boots?
it, right? So that's underneath it, and at the same time, there is something in here. There is this essential wisdom and power and capacity that we all have.
Otherwise you're hopeless.
Right, otherwise it's hopeless, so we have to get in touch with that. Nobody else we can have teachers who help us get in touch with that, but nobody's gonna give that to us. And in fact, lots of sources will try to continue to convince you that you don't have it. So it's a really strong, powerful thing to actually say, no, I've got power. And if we don't recognize that we have that power, it can get really distorted. So acknowledging that power, really working with it, titrating it, recognizing our potency, so that we can direct it. This is like the question about meditation versus contemplation, right? It's like we're recognizing that power so we can direct it, so we can actually work with it in this sustainable way that actually really respects others and recognizes their power too, so that we can see each other's power and not just our own. So we focus a lot on where people are disempowered, and that is super important, and we also have to recognize where we are empowered and the power that we do have, all of us have. So both and. They don't cancel each other out, but if we don't focus on what power we do have, especially in working with our mind and in working with our experience directly, then we miss out on a lot of resource. I saw Demita, yeah.
I wanted to point out a really concrete example of how we're all using our power right now. And one of the things we work with in meditation is listening. And that listening is cultivating a skill of openness. So right now you're all listening. And that is a very gentle form of power. Because you're creating space for another person. And you're connecting this entire environment with your sense factor of listening. And we're always connected through our senses to each other. Our sight, our sound, the temperature in the room, everything inside of our guts. And this is what Miriam teaches so well with Karuna, is to connect with the sense perceptions that tap into our deepest power. So when we're listening, we're actually exercising a tremendous amount of power because we're making space for others. I used to believe that people didn't listen to me. And then I realized that the reason I felt that way is because I wasn't listening to myself. And I was projecting that out onto others. That's my experience of myself. And I assume that that's what's coming back at me. And that mirror is a very important teacher. The same with all of your emotions, like if you feel angry, if you feel sad, check and see what's going on inside. Because if we don't have that awareness that Miriam is speaking about, we might project it in a really reckless way. And then power is lost. So that power does begin here, with our clarity, with our ability to settle, with our ability to be flexible, and all of that is a practice that meditation is cultivating. And just a little plug, we meet here on Thursdays at 6:30 if people want to come sit with us upstairs in the Beloved Community Initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great addition, really. Thank you.
6:30.
So we'll continue to listen together. So in our transition to the next part, you can stretch, wiggle, wriggle, use the restroom obviously if you need it, but we're gonna transition through. Yeah. Thank you everyone.
And I highly recommend Sunday Renee Taylor, the book that Miriam was talking about.
Yeah.
What was the author's name?
We'll make sure.
Yes, we'll make sure it's on the list.
If you look for "The Body Is Not an Apology," you'll find her, because that's her like main thing.
These are commit to vote cards. We're going to be talking a lot about voting. I'm just going to, I'll refer to this later. Don't fill them out now. I'm going to leave some space either here or afterwards to allow for the completion of these. But there are a whole host of issues on these cards that must be addressed.
Did you introduce yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah, I get to introduce Ryan. Ryan Hall works with NextGen, and he does a lot of work on voter registration. And so I am going to give you a brief a brief overview of voting rights. So the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was enacted to enforce the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment was signed in 1870. And so 95 years later, there was finally some teeth in the law. And that law looked like certain states that have been really actively suppressing the vote were monitored by the Justice Department. And they couldn't change any of the voting regulations in their state without the approval of the Justice Department. In 2013, they took away Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which was the enforcement section. So since then, a lot of voter suppression activities have, there was voter suppression before that, as the 2000 elections tell us. But in the elections subsequent to 2013, states sprung up with all these different kinds of voter suppression laws, and we have one in Iowa as well. So Ryan's going to talk a little bit about how important that is to the democratic process and what we can do to engage that. Thanks, Ryan.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to, in the spirit of how we just were in the last session, talk a little bit about the internal before I jump into the external. Because both are equally important, and I often find myself throwing myself at the external more than the internal. And that I need to remind myself that like this body, this vessel is important to help maintain, because there is so much that I wish to do in the external that cannot reach its full potential if I don't reach the one within my own. So talking about diaspora has really sprung up a lot of questions and a lot of curiosity in myself. More recently I found out about more so my mother's side. My grandmother, like I said earlier, was she was born in Massachusetts but grew up in Detroit. Because during the Depression and during the World War, she was essentially thrown into foster care. She was one of many children, and her family could not take care of her. And this is something I recently learned about. I asked her at our latest family gathering, tell me about your folks, tell me about your lineage. And she immediately talked about her dead husband's lineage. Because either she has suppressed that sort of history within herself, or she is unaware or ashamed. And it threw me into a lot of questions of identity of self, and also brought some clarity about my grandfather's lineage. My grandfather's family is from Hungary, and left their community in 1914 or so. They missed a boat because one of my distant relatives had caught pink eye, and so they were unable to catch a boat, but eventually caught the next one to go across the Atlantic. And the boat that they had missed was the Titanic. And it's almost unbelievable. I am incredibly skeptical of most things, and this one especially, but to think that a journey across the Atlantic, which my folks had the privilege of being white across the Atlantic and having safe passage, finding that out is remarkable. How fragile we are. Our lineage, our identities, how if one string of history was cut, we could not be in this space at this time. The magnitude of this, the probability of even human intelligence alone is remarkable. But for us to be in this space and to create this positivity and to move with the spirit in this room and within ourselves is incredible. And I want to give energy to that and say thank you all for being here and doing what you're doing and trying to really wrestle with the internal, because I am wrestling with it with more intention than I had been in the past. That being said, because of the probability of me being here is fascinating, I am really keen on using that same privilege and white passage across the Atlantic to make sure that we, as a human race, as a community, are passing into an intersectional, feminist, socialist time where we are respecting the dignity of all humans and fighting for one another. And also elevating that internal, external, the wrestling. That we have the privilege of being able to wrestle with the internal. We have time, space, money, housing, you name it, and we are in this space with a lot of conditions that allowed us to be here. A lot of people cannot spend nearly as much energy on the internal because they are in survival mode. For money, for housing, for children, for education, and we need to recognize that in their spiritual journey as well, in their struggle as well. And as I've been door knocking in Iowa City for the last year or so, I've encountered some folks in our community that have been stripped of their dignity, of their humanity, all because of a felony drug offense. In the spirit of the mass incarceration that was spoken about by Tamika on Wednesday, I want to hold the thought of mass incarceration as a tool of white supremacy, and felony disenfranchisement as another extension of that tool to remove the right to vote and the right to run for office, and to hold a job, and to have a roof over your head. There are so many barriers that are created because of this white-serving institution that intentionally, overtly criminalizes people of color and poor people, disabled people, mentally ill people, you name it. This institution continues to degrade and to strip humans of their dignity and their rights. And the repeal of the Voting Rights Act and all of these voter suppression is another tool of this same institution to deny folks who don't usually vote Republican the right to vote, to their dignity. And so, moving to the external now, we have a lot of work to do in our community, in our state, in our country, our world. Well, not first, there's really no hierarchy of this. Like, there is a lot of stuff to be done. But currently in power, there are Governor Kim Reynolds, who has the authority to give those who have been convicted of a felony to restore their rights. And she is not doing that. Vilsack in 2005, with the help of Mike Cervantes, who is director of the Inside Out Reentry Program, my apologies, helped lead an effort in 2005 to stand up for those who had been convicted of a felony, who have been criminalized and removed of their rights. And it was great. It expanded voting to over 100,000 Iowans. This is not an insignificant number. And currently there are about roughly 57,000 Iowans who are unable to vote because of something on their record. Half of the felony charges in the United States are drug related. And we know about this war on drugs. Let me give you this really fun quote by a former domestic policy chief to Richard Nixon. And maybe this resonates with, our demographic in this room. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. This was in an interview a couple years back with that policy advisor to Richard Nixon. They knew what they were doing. Supporting these white-serving institutions that were removing people of their right to vote, to get civically engaged. And what they were doing, they were breaking up communities across the country by placing drugs in them, by continuing this war effort that should never have happened, and killed our leaders in MLK, and Malcolm X, and Fred Hampton, kept doing it.
And so it is our duty and our responsibility now to honor that history that is so corrupt and ugly and white-serving and bring about a new sort of age, a movement that is intersectional, that recognizes our corrupt and awful history. And that what we need to do first is get Republicans out of this state, because they don't give a damn about us. They want to remove our right to vote. They want to make it harder to find a house. They want us to, they're giving us tax cuts? No, it's the corporations. So this voter effort is one piece of the puzzle. Yes, we need to get these Republicans out of office. Yes, we need to elect people that will reinstate the rights of those with felonies. But it's more than that. When you talk to someone who's been convicted of a felony, they want their right to vote. They want to be able to run for office. They want to just have their agency and have full citizenship. And they're removed of it because of that same war on drugs. So, more than just voting, it's about jobs, it's about housing, it's about food, it's about so much more than just getting to the ballot box in November, because what we vote for is what we need to do on the ground, too. We need to move in massive numbers to the ballot box in November, but we also need to stand up for our neighbors. Outside of electoral seasons, outside of campaigns, all this. How much time do I have?
10.
Oh, sweet. That's great.
I should have said, how much do you want?
Oh.
Was that enough?
Yeah, that's great. I'll go into the voter ID bill and law that is now actualized in our state. So this is really curious because Iowa is the only state in the union that had initiated a voter suppression law initiated by our elected Secretary of State. Our current Secretary of State, Paul Pate, introduced a restrictive voter ID bill to make it harder to vote. It is the job of the Secretary of State to ensure that all Iowans are voting or are capable of doing so. And so it is the antithesis of democracy to have one of our elected officials to, in his post, strip us of the right to vote or make it more difficult. Voter ID laws have been initiated under the threat of voter fraud.
Yeah.
Oh, this voter fraud. How many cases of voter fraud have there ever been? I mean, it's single digits. And one of them actually happened in 2016 when a white woman wanted to vote for Trump twice.
Yeah.
So it's funny how, this ghost of voter fraud is the impetus for a lot of these restrictive voter ID laws. And how this actually plays out is that you need a photo ID of a certain government variety in order to vote. You need to produce either a driver's license, a passport, a military ID, and to get a card. So you have to be a card-carrying voter. It's ridiculous. And this is problematic because about 11% of adult Iowans do not have a driver's license. That's over 260,000 Iowans. And these tend to be people who do not drive because either of a disability, they are elderly or low income. 15% of all Iowans 65 and older do not have a driver's license. And approximately 25% of all black Iowans lack a driver's license. So who is this targeting? Folks collecting Social Security, folks who are not white, folks who are low income. And if you think about the demographics and the electoral nature of this is an overt overreach by Republicans to strip those who don't vote Republican of their rights. It's so in the clear that it's remarkable that this is upheld in our we're a country of laws. But laws for whom? Who wrote the Constitution? I'll ask you that. Some slave owners. That's the answer. So take the case, or never mind. I'm not going there.
can I just say one?
Please, yes.
Because as you were talking about the wording of the law is like, you must have an ID in order to vote. And there's such a insidious logic to it. Like, well, why not? Why is that so bad, right? Like, there's a surface to it. And then when you bring up like curiosity, like you bring up like, well, but wait a second, what's underneath it? And I know in Wisconsin, we have a very similar issue going on where, you know, then what happens is it's really hard to get that ID that they are saying needs to be present in order to vote. And that's where that, like, on the surface it looks normal, it looks appropriate, it looks safe, and then you dive underneath and that's where all of that duplicity and the sneakiness comes in. And it's very intriguing how well it's laid out.
And
So
they're
I
also
apologize,
changing the hours that you can go to DMV in counties that are predominantly black. That happened in Mississippi, or in Alabama, and also, I think, Minnesota, one of these northern states as well.
Yeah.
And so, and they've also closed DMVs, so that you have to go 2 counties over. And so that's some of that
it's
trickery
like,
they're talking about.
And if we think about how we once abolished the poll tax is still here and alive. I mean, in order to acquire an ID, IDs are not free.
Yeah.
Some states offer free IDs and like do blanket voter registration, like Oregon and other states that are, you know, of a more progressive variety, but this costs money. And it's a significant expense for those who are wage insecure. The combined cost of documents, of travel expenses, waiting time are estimated to range from $75 to $175. You imagine having a poll tax of nearly $100 happen here in the United States in 2018, it's a reality. And I don't want to, you know, I want to open it up as well. If there's any commentary, questions, otherwise, please feel free to, yes.
So, I missed the first few minutes, but is there something, I don't know, concrete that we can be doing to help, not necessarily register people, but help people get IDs that are disenfranchised to help on some kind of really low level, basic level that we can be helping bring these people in? Or
If you know of someone who needs an ID, help get them to the place that they need. Help pay for them to get that ID. I think, you know, we're lucky that Johnson County, and this is probably not a valid form of ID that will get you to vote, is the community ID in Johnson County, through the county. Which is, it's great, because people can open a bank, they can like sign a lease with a community ID. So raising awareness about that issue is really great, because it gets them a lot in our community, but maybe not to that ballot, which is increasingly more difficult to help people try and get there. But recently the county had passed a resolution to ban the box, to where folks don't have to sign if they have a felony offense. Which is a great move forward, because, you know, countless folks who have a felony are unable to hold a job or sign a lease because they have to sign that box in so many different contexts.
So am I understanding you correctly that the ID that was created in Johnson County for those people who don't have driver's license is not valid for voting?
I don't think so.
I don't think it is. So it's only a partial victory getting those started.
You think about all the legislation coming out of Des Moines, it's always targeted at us. The anti-sanctuary city, the anti-voting, the
Minimum wage.
Yeah.
You can't ban the ban on plastic, ban.
That was
I think, Brian, actually, it's a lot of the Koch brothers. I think it's Alec.
Oh,
I'm not sure that
absolutely.
this is as tiny as Iowa.
This is-
I think this is nationwide.
No, you're onto it. This is the playbook by the Koch brothers and Alec, who have they have drafts of legislation that
30
they
years ago.
cast
They
in
wrote it 30 years
Kansas,
ago.
in Wisconsin, in Iowa, in Michigan. This is a tired exercise. A lot of people with a lot of money, the Koch brothers especially, are drafting all these bills that once Republicans gain the trifecta, they just send them out.
We had in Wisconsin, I mean, what happens in Iowa is gonna happen.
We're neighbors,
across, yeah, so, Madison is an area of Wisconsin that's very different than the rest of the state. And I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin, about, 2,500 people, and it is very intriguing to feel that difference between Madison and then other areas, and to have conversations. When the voting law was happening in Wisconsin, that was people's reaction, like, well, why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we have people show IDs? And then when you would try to explain, sometimes it would work, like to explain all of the insidious steps that were underneath it, and they'd be like, oh, wow, that really is not what I thought it was. And then sometimes, of course, they just couldn't hear it. And they just couldn't, they can't believe that this would happen. And so it's an interesting place when you are a different thought process than the rest of your community that extends beyond your city.
I think that connects with our city because it's easy to feel like we are so progressive and we're this, and not get to know the rest of Iowa. Things seem so good here even though they're not, but they're better. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done of getting to know people in other areas of Iowa that are different.
And making sure they
and
feel listened to.
appreciating. Yeah.
And then Judy, you were gonna?
I was just gonna ask for action steps before we move on.
Yeah.
So, things that we can do or encourage.
Initiatives to connect with, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so amongst us, we may have the privilege of being able to vote. So what we need to do is commit to that. And if you need any absentee ballot request forms, I can get you those. But what I handed out is a pledge to vote card, and we're trying to identify issues that people most care about when they get out and vote. But also, if you fill this out, and we'll send you information around where your polling location is and all this jazz. If you've changed locations, if you've moved since you last voted, you need to update your registration before the deadline in October. I have voter registration forms with me if you need to update that. I can get you a form, but feel free to fill out as much or as little information on these cards. We do send emails and text messages around different events going on, like we partner with March for Our Lives, and one of our most stellar volunteers is a woman who's co-founded Students Against School Shootings.
And do they know how to get in touch with you, Ryan?
Do they? How to get in touch with me?
So one of the things I want to point out is that we're transitioning into a place where we will talk more about action. And Ryan will also still be here, so, and also you will have contact with NextGen through our mailing list that we send out to you guys. So if anyone doesn't want to be on that list, let me know, but everybody will get contact and access to everybody who's presented. But we do have to transition, and I just want us to take a minute and thank Ryan.
So Demita, we do have some duplication of effort. There is a Democratic headquarters in Kennedy Plaza on Gilbert Street across from World of Bikes. I think they're open every day but Monday, and we've been knocking doors to get people to apply for absentee ballots.
That's great, and I wish we
It's
could
a
talk about it
different
more
level.
now, but we have to switch gears,
Okay.
just so that we can give you guys more time to talk. We're going to go into some restorative justice circles where you actually will be able to talk about action plans, and you can put that information there.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Rachel has a few logistical, maybe one logistical or two logistical concerns. I'm not sure. She'll let us know. But we want to give her a minute to request that first, or make some requests of you guys, and then we will be meeting. We will reconvene upstairs in about 5 minutes. So, are you ready, Rachel?
Yeah, just,
She's just being ready.
Hi friends. Okay, so the last day is today. I don't know if you guys knew that, just a reminder. We are ending roughly around 12:45. We have a special speaker coming in around 12:15, so we might run past. I mentioned this yesterday, but we might run past that 12:30 timeline that we gave you earlier.
Can we also see if people are willing to go to one today? Because we actually got our schedule pushed back this morning. So I'm wondering if people have until 1 to be here? And how many of us can?
And if you have to leave,
And if you
no
need
hard
to
feelings.
leave earlier, obviously, but thank you, those of you who can give us another half hour.
Yes,
So
leave
we're
when you
getting
need
done
to.
at 1, is that what?
That's what
That's
we're
the idea.
aiming for. That's the idea. And then anyone can stay after 1 to help tear down. You're doing me a huge favor because I'm very weak. I can't move all those tables by myself.
Come on, Rachel.
Well, like, I think it's just that my body doesn't work with those tables. They're round and I don't know, like they just fall over. It's bad. So if anyone can stay, if anyone wants to take home bagels or the leftover pizza that we'll probably have, or anything really, totally welcome to it. I know that Daisha and Autumn want to, so no hard feelings again if you can't, but I think that's it. Oh, and the reception tonight is at 6 o'clock at, not Foxtail, Foxhead?
That's it.
Foxhead? Foxtail.
I say cat head, but
Whichever one sounds right.
It's Foxtail.
Foxtail. Fox something. So
is it Foxtail or Foxhead?
Foxhead.
Okay, so I mix it up regularly. So it is Foxhead.
Announcements didn't
Oh, yes, and also you guys, Rachel wanted me to remind you that next week on the 25th, as a part of this program, we will be visiting, initially this was a 2-week program, and the youth section was going to go to the Meskwaki Reservation, the Meskwaki Nation. They still invite us to come. So anyone who's participated this week is welcome to join us next week, and we'll be, carpooling to go out there. And so it would be great if you guys can indicate when we send you our closing, thank you email at the end of this that you would like to join us. So respond to that and say, yes, I want to come. So you'll get that in the next few days along with a mailing list that has all of the participants so you guys can stay in touch and work together. But let us know if you want to join us at the gathering. They're going to give us a tour. They're going to show us their economic development projects. And they're going to talk, and we can have an engagement about what it means to be living on stolen land and what it means to be in alignment with values that make us real allies to them. So it's a really good opportunity to have a conversation with our neighbors.
Where's that located?
It's an hour and a half. Where's Tama?
West.
Down Highway
West.
30.
West.
And yes, and I'll know better after we go where it is. So okay. So are there any other announcements?
Just logistics, if I may. You're gonna get a moment to have a break and move and such, and we're gonna end up in 2 different spots after this to do circles. How many members of the Authentics are here? Please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. How many members of Just Love are here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So those are 2 kind of big. How many of, I apologize, Connect 5? 1, 2, okay, 3, okay. And then how many of, I apologize, I can't.
One Nation.
One Nation, thank you. 1, 2. Okay, so Connect 5 and One Nation, you are going to report to the BCI office, and you're going to have your circle there. And then the other 2 delegates, since you're bigger, you're going to be in our meal space in the big white chair circle. And so after the break, please report to those different spots. Everybody's clear where they're going? Pish Posh? No, that's not it.
That's good.
Pish
That's
Pish.
good.
I don't know what Pish Posh is, but the teachers and volunteers, why don't we just kind of gather quick and we'll do a quick division of us into those 2 different spaces.
Are we together as a big group then in the eating place or in our separate?
After break, you'll report to your assigned spaces for the circle. And eventually we're going to come back together, but
Does that make sense to everybody?
Are the two circles together? Are the two?
Correct, yes, thank you, Judy, yes. Those two delegates would be in a circle together. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
So then when this is flashing, it's recording. So I'll just try to get back far enough to get everything in, and then when we edit it, if I can focus in on somebody I can see speak, I'll do that. But this should be good, just let it go.
And it's a red button, it's a toggle on and off.
Yes, and then when you're done here, you can just press that one off and move it out of the way. Then if you feel like when the speaker comes on, you could just turn it back off. Yeah. Focus on her, turn this on.
I just don't think we're gonna be upstairs after this.
Okay, well then, yeah. Okay. I'll put some chairs on here too to cover the fire.
Well, the school had 3,000 students and a lot of other problems, you could I was that this is fashioned after how the Aboriginals would handle business. They would sit around a fire with a talking piece, take turns, and they would just resolve conflict, celebrate one another, handle business. And so it's kind of fashioned after that. And so in this, there's a container. You step into it, you're in it, and then you step out of it. And we step into it, opening it up with either a saying, a song, some type of reading. And so I'm going to open up this circle with a reading. And it's called The 11th Hour. It's by the Hope by Elders. It says, "You have been telling people that this is the 11th hour. Now we must go back and tell the people that this is the hour, and there are things to be considered. Where are you living? What are you doing? What are your relationships? Are you in right relation? Where is your water? Know your garden. It is time to speak your truth. Create your community. Be good to each other. And do not look outside yourself for your leader." Then he clasped his hands together, smiled and said, "This could be a good time. There is a river flowing now very fast. It is so great and swift, and there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on to the shore. They will feel they are being torn apart and will suffer greatly. No, the river has its destination. The elders say, we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river, keep our eyes open and our heads above the water. And I say, see who is there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment that we do, our spiritual growth and journey will come to a halt. The time of the one wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and your vocabulary. All that we can do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration. We are the ones we've been waiting for. So we're going to start off with a kind of check-in introduction. And so when you check in, you're just basically saying, I'm Laura, I'm checking in, and you're telling us who you are, what was the reason you initially came to Freedom School, okay, and how you're doing today. Okay, so I'll start. I'm Laura, and I'm checking in, and Danita invited me to be one of the instructors for Freedom School. Never heard of Freedom School, didn't know what it entailed, but I was super excited about it because there's so much social justice work that needs to be done in this community. And I personally just went through a serious matter that kind of had me in a depressive state. And I'm just looking thirsty for others who are willing to make a change, make a difference in this community, like I want to make a difference in this community. So that's what I'm doing.
My name is David. I'm doing okay, thanks. I'm here because I've been asking the question since joining the Poor People's Campaign. The question I've been asking is, what is liberation?
My name is Meg. I am a little tired this morning and a late night to work after we get done here. So I'm a little tired. Needed more coffee. And here, as I was fortunate enough to become friends with Danita and hear about her vision for Freedom School, and it was absolutely the right time and place for the journey that I was on too. So I was excited to help support and be a part.
My name is Nani, and Danita invited me here from Seattle, Washington, came just for this. And two things on my mind. One is my kid recently took part in one of these circular justice thing that was a sham with the police and Black Lives Matter in Seattle. So I'm hoping I can learn something here that I can take back home and share with the folks there. And then secondly, my neighborhood is an unfriendly, predominantly white, upper class, whatever you want to call it, neighborhood. And I do not have a good relationship with them. So I'm trying to figure out how I can maybe make a change there to make life more comfortable for all of us.
I'm Catherine, and Davina invited me, and she's a good salesperson. Racial justice really bothers me and white privilege because I grew up in Mississippi. I probably have had more white privilege than anyone else here. And also because I miss black people. The town I grew up in was 40% black. And while I didn't know a lot of black people, they were around. And I would like to know more black people here in our city. I've lived in Iowa since 1969.
Hi, I'm Marge. I've never spoken with Marge before, and I'm also always very nervous when I speak in public. I came to the restorative circle group that meets on Saturday mornings with Lori fairly recently. The reason I sought that out was that I was a paraeducator in the school district, and while teachers are being given instruction on how to deal with conflict, they're not providing it for paraeducators. And I'm in a position where I have to deal with conflict on the moment, and I don't want to write people up. I started out zero tolerance being my training, and it never worked for me. I was never comfortable doing it. And so, in order for me to continue being patient and kind to the students I work with, I'm seeking out my own training. And that's what took me to Restorative Justice Circle. And what brought me here was Facebook knows who I am because it just popped up on my Facebook.
My name's Ryan. I'm checking in, and I got invited to visit by Davina, and I am really thrilled about Freedom School, and I learned a lot, especially through her this last year and the months leading up to this event. But I'll say that today I'm sort of wrestling with the sort of hard conversations I have been having and looking to have. More particularly, I'm a Facebook agitator, and it creates some really unhealthy dialogue. And recently, I posted about a really tragic police shooting that happened in Chicago last week, and my cousin, who I often classify as a fascist, served in the Iraq War and in the Marines, and now he's in the police force. And we're on all different sides of a lot of issues, but I tried to engage in like a reconciling conversation with him recently, and it went fairly well, rather than just like throwing, bombs at one another like we usually do. So I'm wrestling with those hard conversations and how to, recharge myself so I can be the best person I need to be in the struggles that I find myself in.
That's Autumn, she's great. That's what she said. I'm Rachel. I'm checking in move through those different hats and identities. And I'm just happy to be here with people who are really exploring and trying to grow a community. Really is what we're trying to do, is trying to grow. So, thank you.
I'm Davida, and I'm here because of Meg. Basically, Meg and Suzanne accepted my grant proposal, and they're funding. They're the largest funders for this, so they're the sponsors for Freedom School. I started thinking about this a year ago and writing about it, and then an opportunity arose where we could make it real, and that was because of BCI. And I just also want to say, even though this isn't the appreciation moment, but we've also gotten several large donations from local churches and individuals. And one of them is Sanctuary Church, and one of the associate pastors is here, and that's Mr. Gurman Borger. And as a dyslexic person, that's pretty good for me. And also we got a very large donation from New Song Principal Church, and that's Mr. Reeves' church, as well as Suzanne's church. So a lot of awesome support has come from this community, and that's why I was able to be here.
I'm Jennifer, and I grew up in Iowa City. I'm back with my husband after being away in Minneapolis, St. Paul, for a number of years. Then we went to Ethiopia, I did Peace Corps for 3.5 years. Then we were living in Myanmar for 2 years, and I was teaching there. So what is this community? This is where I grew up. Those of you who live here, I hope I see you around. I'm back. I don't know my place here. I don't know my place in the U.S. Like, international focus, and then coming back, it's like, what planet are we on? And what brought me here is art. A friend of mine added me to a Facebook group of female artists called Blue Stocking. If you're an artist, you can join the Blue Stocking group. I never went to any of their meetings, but I saw the post. She put out a request for a screen printing instructor, and I said I could do that. So thank you for putting that call out. And since that time, I quit Facebook, but because I kind of want to get into real, and I don't know how to handle the invasiveness of Facebook, so I just cut myself off. That's it.
My name is